inside. I see the born. I see the born of no return. It's just ahead now. It's just ahead now. Can't you see we're rushing for the end? I see the point of no return. Oh, now I see the point of no return. It's just ahead.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's Tuesday again, September 16th of 2014. Halfway through September already. We had our, I guess you could call it, festivities surrounding the September 11th incident last week. Surprisingly few protests. I kind of thought there'd be more, I don't know, I thought there'd be more folks out there who were a little irate that the status quo was still in force. You know, it seemed to be a photo op for politicians getting out there talking about, you know, them evil Muslims and all that, you know. September 11th, 2001 had to have been one of the most, I don't know, devastating incidents ever to happen to the United States since, I don't know, what could possibly compare? Maybe the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor? Maybe. At least with that one, you know, we kind of had an idea who done it, you know, because they flew in airplanes with their logos on it. And, you know, at least we knew it was indeed Japanese fighters that clobbered our territory, killed our people. This time around, it's a little harder to figure out, you know. I mean, the planes that hit those towers supposedly were ours, you know, supposedly flown by a bunch of guys, most of them from Saudi Arabia, some from Egypt, you know, diehard Muslims who liked pink-haired strippers, hard liquor, and snorting cocaine, who apparently hijacked these airplanes using box cutters. Hijacked the airplanes, and then, you know, some guys who could barely fly a Cessna in a straight line managed to pull off some extraordinary maneuvers to hit the Twin Towers in New York and the Pentagon here in Northern Virginia. And it seemed that just moments after it happened, everybody knew who did it. Osama did it. Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden did it. So for years and years and years, you know, we had to check under our bed every night to see if maybe Osama bin Laden was hiding under there because he was out to get us. He was jealous of our freedoms. And that's why he did it. So in order to defeat him, yeah, we lost all of our freedoms. Kind of makes you wonder who won. I mean, all they had to do was fly a few airplanes into a few buildings, got us so scared that we surrendered and gave them what they wanted. I mean, if they were really jealous of our freedoms, and all they had to do was knock a few buildings down, and we happily gave them all away, They won, right? Now, the problem with an enemy like an Osama bin Laden or a Al-Qaeda or CIADA or whatever the heck it is, you know, they don't really have any fixed targets. These guys are kind of ghosts in the night. You know, they one day they're in a cave in a mountain range called Tora Bora, you know, someplace in Afghanistan straddling the border with Pakistan. The next day they're whining and dining with U.S. officials in the White House. They're really kind of hard to pin down, you know. Okay, now, at least when the Japanese got Pearl Harbor, we knew where the Japanese were, you know. We had some idea who the bad guy was, and we kind of knew where to go and kick his ass. But with somebody like an Al-Qaeda, we declared this mysterious war on terrorism, which is kind of like a war on poverty, or, you know, a war on obesity, or, you know, the war on cancer. You know, the enemy is pretty hard to define, pretty hard to nail down, and for military folks, they're pretty hard to go kick their ass, because you don't know who they are, you don't know where they're hiding. They could be anywhere. A lot of them are in the backyard of folks who are, in theory, our allies. So, you know, I guess I would have hated to have been a military man during that period in time, because, you know, gee, you know, you got to show the American people that you're doing something. You can't take a whack in the back of the head with a 2x4 like what 9/11 represented and not be seen to give a strong response. So let's go back through our old book and see whose asses we've been wanting to kick for a while and pick one. That seems to be how our current situation evolved. There'd always been kind of a running disagreement between the United States and Iraq. And, you know, we weren't real happy with the way the Mujahideen evolved once they finally kicked the Russians out of Afghanistan. You know, they didn't want to accept our ideas on how pipelines should be run, and that, you know, that's contrary to U.S. national interests. So even though Saddam Hussein and Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, and even though the Taliban in Afghanistan were pretty much running a Stone Age country, just, you know, barely recovering from their occupation by Russia, we had a bone to pick with both of them. So they kind of took the blame for an enemy that we could not otherwise seem to define. Did you know that every president in the last quarter of a century, every president in the last 25 years has issued orders to bomb Iraq? Yeah. It's kind of shocking. Now, as we so-called conquered these countries, you know, we pretty much laid waste to Iraq, pretty much laid waste to Afghanistan. By tradition, when the United States conquers a nation, they plug in their hand-picked government, who will then run that government in accord with U.S. interests. We saw it happen in Afghanistan. We saw it happen in Iraq. Not too long thereafter, we saw it happen in Libya, and we saw it happen in Egypt. So, you know, that just is the way of things. That's the way it's been since Roman times. You know, I suspect the Sumerians had the same basic philosophy. You go in, you kick the bad guy's ass, you plug in your hand-picked leaders, and from there on out, the resources of that nation are funneled into your coffers in the form of tribute. That is the profit for your conquest. Now, when we kicked Iraq's ass, everybody was talking, all the big shots were talking about how, oh, no, that war in Iraq, that's not going to cost you American peasants, people, nothing, because, you know, we're going to pay for that with Iraqi oil. So here we've conquered one of the biggest oil-producing nations in the Middle East with oil reserves that some speculate are greater than those of Saudi Arabia. Did you see your gas prices go down? Did they even stay the same? I mean, in the last 13 years, since we've been on this non-stop war of aggression in the Middle East, have your gas prices gone down? Have they at least stayed the same? I mean, have you seen any benefit, any tribute from the conquest of these nations? Probably not. And frankly, you shouldn't expect to. Well, now, those darn pesky nations over there in the Middle East, they just flat refuse to stay conquered. Now, this is most unsavory because, see, the U.S. isn't finished yet. On their list of nations that they want to conquer is Syria and Iraq and Somalia, and you know, there's a few other hot topics, you know all wrapping up with a conquest of Iran. But if we can't keep those nations conquered that we conquered last week, how the heck do you expect us to proceed with the next conquest? Now, this is really discouraging. It truly is. Well, you know, the next target on the list was the nation of Syria. You know, they really wanted to go into Syria. See, the interesting thing is, if they could stir up trouble with Syria, Iran has a mutual defense pact. And boy, you know, if we could get into a little bit of a tussle with Syria, that would just kind of automatically pull in Iran. And that's another big one on the list. That's a big prize. Iran is a big prize. We've been wanting to kick Iran's ass for the longest time. But gee, you know, that pesky Assad, you know, we thought we had him with his hands in the cookie jar with his chemical weapons, and then he went and gave up his chemical weapons and took away our good excuse. It was a terrible day. John Kerry cried for weeks after that snafu. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, see, we got these here insurgents that we've been arming to the teeth, trying to get them to go in and kick Assad's ass for us. Assad, by the way, that's the mafia leader who happens to run Syria right now. And, you know, they weren't terribly successful in their conquest of Syria. As a matter of fact, they found Syria to be, you know, biting off a little bit more than they could chew. So, you know, instead they took all those nifty weapons that we've been giving them all these years, and they turned around and they attacked guys that were supposedly on our side in Iraq. Darn it. And, of course, the Iraqi people see them coming in, and they're not real happy with this U.S. puppet government that was put in place after the conquest of Iraq. So, you know, they saw this, you know, Free Syrian Army, or I guess they've been labeled ISIS or ISIL now. They saw these guys coming in as a golden opportunity to raise a little hell of their own. They're not real happy with those guys running things out of Baghdad anyway. And they figure with these boys coming in, you know, armed to the teeth with, you know, first-class U.S. weapons, this would be a great opportunity for them to assert their own independence. Well, now, gee, we can't be having any of that. So what do we do? What do we do? You know, we really want Syria. We really, really, really want Iran. And now we got this ISIL Islamic State operation coming in and making trouble for our hand-picked boys in Iraq. Well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, the American people probably are not going to put up with yet another armed invasion of Iraq. So the promise has been made that there will be no American boots on the ground in Iraq. Now, do you believe that? How do you know a politician's lying? Usually when his mouth is moving. Now, they have told us that there will be no boots on the ground. Well, you know, there's already roughly 2,300 pairs of boots on the ground in Iraq. They're being sold to us as advisors. Remember how we got into Vietnam? First there were the advisors, and then, oops, the advisors came under fire, so they needed just a little bit of armed backup so the advisors wouldn't get their butts shot off. So in came some Marines, and oh my goodness, you know, now the Marines are coming under attack, so we need just a little bit of air support. And you know, once the camel's nose is under the tent, you know, it's pretty hard to keep the rest of him out of there. Before too long, you got yourself another armed incursion. And that's what it's kind of looking like what's going to happen in Iraq right now. But, you know, one of the side benefits of having this ISIL Islamic State enemy, who, by the way, just a few months ago was called the Free Syrian Army. These were the boys who we were arming to the teeth to go kick Assad's ass in Syria, but, you know, things didn't work out quite right. But, you know, that's okay. Now we'll use them in another way because they have kind of a fluid border. They don't really respect the border between Syria and Iraq. Frankly, they don't respect the border between Syria and Turkey either. But we now have a good excuse to carry the war against ISIS into Syria. Now, wait a minute. In Iraq, we've got the tacit approval of the puppet regime that supports U.S. interests. We've got their tacit approval to bomb the living daylights out of these guys in Iraq. But Syria is a sovereign nation, and we do not have Assad's permission to come bomb these guys in Syria. Now, Assad, the mafioso that runs Syria, has pretty much said, hey, look, you know, I'm willing to cooperate with you guys. We've got a common enemy here, and I'm willing to get on board. You know, let's coordinate attacks against this ISIS outfit. But just as the United States has refused to cooperate with Iran, who would like to help us kick ISIL Islamic State out of Iraq, we said, no thanks. You know, we'll do it on our own. We basically said to Assad, no, not only do we not wish you to cooperate, but if you should in any way hamper our airstrikes against ISIS on your territory, we're going to be coming after you. Isn't that precious? So we take upon ourselves the right to bomb a sovereign nation and then tell them that if they object or resist in any way, they will then become targets of our wrath. Now, does that sound to you like the actions of a sane and rational government? Or does that sound to you like the actions of what most would call a terrorist nation? You're going to have to consider arguments like these pretty quickly, because it's starting. It's starting. Pope Francis says World War III has already begun. ISIS, by the way, has threatened his life. You're going to have to consider and make up your own mind. But right now, it's starting to look like the run-up to World War III is picking up speed. That's odd. I was kind of half expecting if my timing had been just right, the music would have started playing in the background. And I'm not hearing it. I'm not sure I have time to start with my next little rant. Huh. We're at 28. All right, where's that commercial, Mr. Producer Man? Okay, maybe my iPad is a little slow tonight. Not really sure. So I'll go ahead and try for another segment here, and let's see if I can beat the music. Elizabeth Warren, Senator Elizabeth Warren, a Democrat. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't agree with this woman on a lot of things. But one of the things she has been arguing in favor of recently are steps that might reduce the burden of student loans. Now, I'm not sure if my audience really understands just how significant a burden student loans are, but right now, outstanding student loans amount to 1.2 trillion with a T, $1.2 trillion. That is more than the combined credit card debt of all Americans. $1.2 trillion in student debt. There are examples of people collecting Social Security whose Social Security payments are being tapped for student loan debt that they acquired. Now, under the Bush administration, student loans were put into a special category. You can't even declare bankruptcy on student loans anymore. I mean, once you've taken on that student loan debt, you are encumbered with that for the rest of your life. Now, so far, they haven't passed a law that says the debt is handed down to your kin, but so at least at this point, if you die, you escape your student loan debt. But, ain't no way to get out of it. Now, a lot of people have student loan debt that's at interest rates that by today's standards would seem incredibly high. We're talking 7, 8, 9% student loans. If you take a student loan out tomorrow, your rate's about 3.5%. Now, this Lady Elizabeth Warren put what I think is a very reasonable proposal on the table. She has put a proposal on the table that anybody who has student loan debt now should be able to, not just able to, but encouraged to refinance that student loan debt at a more reasonable interest rate. They're talking, 3.8%, somewhere down in that range. Now, she was not able to get any traction at all on her initial proposal, which was to forgive a vast quantity of student loan debt. But, you know, on the idea of being able to refinance it at today's more desirable interest rates, it appeared she got a little bit of traction on it. It looked like that one just might fly. But she blames Republicans for setting up a filibuster that sent that one to an untimely grave. Now, for those of you who don't, you know, maybe you've got a little bit of problem with it. The problem is those that have student debt have been, because of that student loan debt, have been unable to buy homes. They've been unable to buy, they can't buy cars. I mean, frankly, they're being strangled by their student debt. Seems that a lot of them can't find jobs. So they spent 4 years, 6 years, 8 years in college. Maybe they've got a bachelor's degree. Maybe they have an advanced degree. And they are unable to find employment that is suitable for their educational level. You got an awful lot of PhDs out there waiting tables. I was just informed by by Mr. Producer Man at the Rents Radio Network that the automation system locked up a little bit, and that's why we missed that commercial break that I was expecting at the 27-minute mark. I am told that we will take our normal break at 41 minutes, and so we move on. So the summary is, you've got an awful lot of people out there who are saddled with so much student loan debt, who cannot find employment that they thought would be assured given their advanced educations. They can't pay the debt back. They can't declare bankruptcy. Can you say bubble about to burst? I would say that, you know, the idea of being able to refinance that debt at today's more reasonable interest rates is probably, you know, the most sane and rational. I think a more aggressive approach to it is to recognize the fact that a lot of that debt is odious and just write it off. What do you think? You may not have a student loan. Maybe you don't have any kids that are saddled with student loans. I can tell you that my kids both had pretty significant student loans. Now, my one kid managed to pay hers off. The other, with, you know, help from family, has managed to pay most of theirs off. But it's kind of insidious. I can tell you it's kind of insidious the way kids get hooked into these things. I can tell you this from my personal experience. Here's what happened to me. Okay? We're paying as you go for the kid to go to college. Okay? We've got a pay-as-you-go plan. Every month, we're sending money to the college. Every month, we're sending money to the kid. Okay, here's your living expenses, and Mr. College, here's for the tuition. Now, the college, behind your back, goes to the kid and says, oh, you know, what would you do if mom or dad died and all of a sudden couldn't pay that tuition? You better go ahead and get qualified for a student loan anyway, because, you know, if anything happens, you know, you want to make sure you're able to complete your education. And the kid said, oh, boy, that's probably not a bad idea. Yeah, let's go ahead and do it. I'll go ahead and sign up. So you're paying as the parent. You're paying and paying and paying. And then at the end of the semester, you know, there's some student loan money that's available to the kid. So the bursar just writes a check and hands it to the kid. Well, all of a sudden the kid has got this big chunk of change in their hand. Well, now, if you was a kid and all of a sudden you had $3,500, $4,000 cash, you know, what would you do? I mean, You're kind of dumb, kind of wet behind the ears, you know. Cabo San Lucas, here I come. Spring break, yahoo. You know, you wonder how these kids can afford to do these fancy, luxurious vacations that their parents can't afford. That's how they do it. Mom and dad are writing the checks every month so the kid can go to school. And then behind their back, a student loan is issued in the child's name just in case, for some reason, mom and dad can't afford to pay the bill. Now the kid's out of college. All of a sudden they look back and, you know, they should have it free and clear, okay, because mom and dad were paying all along. Now all of a sudden they look back and, holy cow, I'm $10,000, $15,000 in debt. Or for some, holy cow, I'm $50,000 in debt. That's how it happens. It's a gigantic bubble that is a significant drain on the American economy. And right now, the lobbyists for the bankers who are holding these notes that you cannot discharge anyway, you know, you can't. The only way to get rid of that debt is either write those SOBs a check or die. Okay? That's it. Those are the only ways to be rid of that debt. The lobbyists for the bankers who hold that paper have dug in their heels and will not even permit the most rational of propositions to pass, allowing these people to refinance that debt at a more appropriate interest rate. Not even the 0% interest rate that the Federal Reserve provides as interbank exchange. That proposal was put on the table and immediately shot down. Why, that's un-American. That's communism. It's okay for the Federal Reserve to loan your money to Chase Manhattan at 0% interest, but it's not okay for Chase Manhattan to lend your kid that money at 0% interest rate. Do you understand the priorities of this economic system now? Do you understand who this system is set up to benefit? Scottish independence. I don't know enough about the historical aspects of this topic to really know, what the deal is. I mean, I saw the movie Braveheart. That's about my understanding of why it is so important to Scotsmen. I can tell you that the vote right now is reported by the media to be very, very close. And whenever you see one of these votes that's 49%, 51%, I want a paper ballot, okay? I want a paper ballot that somebody can physically count. If that election is running that close and they let the machines tally the vote, he who controls the programming in the machines is going to determine whether the Scots achieve their independence or not. What's at stake? Well, the Scottish people have long considered themselves separate from the rest of Britain. Economically, the Scots are in a pretty good position. They've got that North Sea oil. They really do not need to be subsidizing the welfare state, the rest of Britain. And for most Scotsmen, it appears that independence would put them in a better position, a stronger position than where they are right now. Will they win their independence or not? Like I say, when it's 49% to 51%, he who controls the voting machines usually decides. It is 41 minutes into the program. I'm hearing the music in the background, so I will have to back out of here for a few moments while the studio sells some products. Please do stand by. I'll be right back to do a little more barking at the moon in just a moment. You know, the scary thing about missing a break like that is that, threw my timing all off. Thought I had that segment timed perfectly, so we just, but hey, welcome to live broadcasting in the 21st century. There's a lot of stories in the news. There's some Ebola news that's out there. We're going to send 3,000 troops to Ebola. What really scares me about sending 3,000 U.S. troops to fight Ebola is the mission creep. I mean, initially they're talking about how they're just going to send them over there to protect these triage centers, and that sounds pretty rational. But then you look at how the mission creep is happening in Iraq, and I can foresee forced vaccinations at the point of an M16, forced quarantines under threat of shooting you if you come out of your house. I mean, just how far is the U.S. willing to go to contain Ebola? Keep an eye on it. I guess we'll just have to find out. There is some Fukushima news. It came out that, oh my goodness, like 2 trillion. This is a level of radiation that is beyond my imagining. Now, this is reported by Natural News, and sometimes, Natural News tends to hype things, so I don't know, but they're reporting that at least 2 trillion becquerels worth of radioactive material has flowed out of the Fukushima Daiichi reactors into the Pacific Ocean. 2 trillion becquerels. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, let's see here. Okay. If you, as an individual, receive 10,000 millisieverts, 10,000 millisieverts as a short-term whole-body dose, you will suffer immediate illness such as nausea, decreased white blood cell count, and subsequent death within a few weeks. Now that's 10,000 millisieverts. Between 2 and 10 sieverts in a short-term dose would cause severe radiation sickness with increased likelihood that this would be fatal. A sievert. How does that compare to a becquerel? Well, 1 sievert and 1 becquerel are roughly equivalent. So there's enough radioactivity in the Pacific Ocean to pretty much kill every man, woman, and child, not just in Japan, but probably in most of the northern hemisphere. And we wonder why the fishing is a little weak out in the Pacific. But every once in a while you got to laugh at the goofballs that are running this nation. Last week in the after show, I did a quasi Jeff Foxworthy bit. Jeff Foxworthy, he's the one that's always saying, "Hey, you might be a redneck if." Well, last week in the after show, I did a little bit for the last few holdouts in the studio audience, where I said, you might be living in a country run by idiots if. Well, some new and exciting one comes out every week. But if you think back, here, you're going to have to put your thinking cap on because, I know how people's memories are about things like this. But you remember back a while ago, we had this little thing go down in a town called Benghazi in Libya. Something about a, armed incursion into the embassy compound, and one of our ambassadors was apparently killed, and it was a pretty grisly affair, and there were rumors going around that somebody gave an order to stand down, and that nobody was, we weren't supposed to fight back or some such nonsense. Remember all that? You remember that? And I'm going to play a little bit here for you that has been reported a lot, but, I'm not sure that a lot of you have heard it fully in context. But remember when it was Hillary Clinton said, "What difference does it make now?" Well, I want you to hear this bit in context. Consider and make up your own mind. Let me see. I got to get everything wired together here to play correctly, but let's see.
Not the fact.
But
and the American people could have known that within days.
And
here we
they
go.
didn't know that.
With all due respect, the fact is we had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest, or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make? It is our job to figure out what happened and do everything we can to prevent it from ever happening again, Senator. Now, honestly, I will do my best to answer your questions about this, but the fact is that people were trying in real time to get to the best information. The IC has a process, I understand, going with the other committees to explain how these talking points came out. But, to be clear, it is, from my perspective, less important today, looking backwards, as to why these militants decided they did it, than to find them and bring them to justice. And then maybe we'll figure out what was going on in the meantime.
Okay, thank you, Madam Secretary. Senator.
Okay. Now, in context, taken in context, her "what difference does it make now" statement actually sounds a little bit more rational than some of the hype we were given at the time. And, I as much as I hate to admit it, I almost want to agree with her in context. I mean, it's over at this point. Why are we worried about, this intermediate nonsense? Why don't we try to figure out who the heck did it and go kick their ass? So, I mean, on that score, as much as I hate to agree with that shrill shrew, in context, I don't think that statement was nearly as damning as a lot of alternative media tried to make it out. But, everybody's like that in the media. They want to pick one little snippet and use it to improve their argument on whatever. But one thing has come out that's very damning, and that's that Hillary Clinton's minions launched a weekend operation in the basement of the State Department to scrub damning documents related to the Benghazi attack that killed a U.S. ambassador. Bottom line is, they were destroying evidence. They wanted to go back through all the documents in the State Department during that period in time and make sure that nothing that might look unsavory related to Hillary Clinton or her cronies was still a part of the public record. Yeah. The only reason we know about this now is because a whistleblower has come forward, a guy by the name of Raymond Maxwell, who is a Deputy Assistant Secretary at the State Department. So, that in and of itself, to me, is much more damning than Hillary's testimony before the Congress, where a little snippet was pulled out of context. What difference does it make now? And used over and over and over again to demonize the woman, when in fact there is plenty real stuff out there that demonizes Hillary Clinton, rather than cherry-picking one stupid little snippet out of context. That's my argument on the subject. You're going to have to consider and make up your own damn mind. Have you heard that all the fighting's over in Ukraine? Everything's cool in Ukraine now, right? Do you believe it? there does appear to be a ceasefire that's holding in Ukraine. And at least one of the eastern Ukrainians has come forward and says, you know, the deal that's been put on the table from Kiev looks pretty sweet, and yeah, I think we're going to go with that deal. So there may actually be a deal worked out in Ukraine that keeps that particular little tinderbox from igniting. However, the United States, in its infinite wisdom, along with many NATO nations, are doing preparedness drills, shall we say, in Western Ukraine, and arming the Western Ukrainians to the teeth. So it, you know, the back channel view of this is, okay, maybe they're really gonna smoke the peace pipe and everybody kiss and make up and be friends again, or maybe, just maybe, it's all going to go in the hell in a handbasket again. What do you guys out in the audience think of a fellow named Ted Cruz? Okay, you know, I find myself liking this guy on a lot of subjects. Okay, I mean, he is dead set on closing the border. He's out there making all kinds of arguments against Obama, using his executive pen and cell phone to just authorize all the illegals to be legal again. You know, so I kind of agree with him on that. He's been a staunch supporter of Second Amendment rights. I kind of admire his position on that. So, you know, I look at a lot of the positions that this guy Ted Cruz from Texas is taking, and, you know, I say, okay, he's my guy, he's my guy, he's my guy. Then he goes and opens his mouth at some Christian fundraiser or some whatever, and starts going on and on and on about how if you have any question but that Israel, you know, is the greatest place in the universe, then you're anti-American. Now, okay, now listen, Ted, okay, you're elected to represent the people of Texas in the United States Senate. You were not elected to represent the state of Israel in the Knesset. Understand who's writing your paycheck, AIPAC, and please get on board. You either represent the people or you represent those who are your big financial contributors. You make up your mind. I'm hearing the music in the background, guys. I got to blow out of here. It's that time. I've done enough barking at the moon for this week, so you betcha. See you again next Tuesday. Good night, all. Ah, there we go. Now I've got audio. Yeah, Teddy Cruz. Oh, boy. You know, I feel the same way about that guy, Rick Perry, you know. I mean, he'll say 10 things, and out of the 10 things that come out of his mouth, you know, I'll be pretty much in agreement with 6 or 7 of them. And then there's 3 or 4 that, you know, make me want to smack him in the face with a wet carp. Politicians, you know, what can I say? You know, the one really tough article that I wanted to get to this week that I just flat ran out of time on, and to be honest with you, I got to blame that snafu at the studio. Apparently there was some kind of a snafu with their automation system, and the automation system didn't flip the switch on the commercial at 27:30. It's supposed to go off, and I'm sitting there at 27 getting ready. I'm sitting there at 28 wondering what the hell happened. I'm sitting there at 29 saying, well, wait a minute. You know, kind of threw me off my pace. I might actually have been able to finish all of tonight's articles if that had not been the case. But, you know, hey, live broadcasting in the 21st century, you just got to get used to it. But I really kind of wanted to talk about this phenomena that is sweeping the nation called asset forfeiture. Asset forfeiture. Are you guys familiar with this? I mean, does that ring any bells? I mean, have you heard any articles on this? Here it is in a nutshell, okay? You're driving down the highway, minding your own business. I don't know, maybe you're 3, 4, 5 miles over the limit or some such nonsense. You get pulled over by the state trooper. And, you figure, okay, well, I was 5 miles over the limit. I'm going to get me a speeding ticket, So, and next thing the cop gets some wild hair and decides maybe he might smell the residuals of a marijuana emanating from your car. Okay. So he calls in, the dog, and the dog does a walk around your car, and the dog does what's called an alert. Now, you got to understand that, these dogs are very well trained. I mean, they will alert on cue for their handler because they're looking for a, little tasty doggy goodie. And they know what the deal is. If they alert, they get a little doggy treat, so they're going to alert. A dog is going to alert. So now they've got probable cause to search your automobile for marijuana. Okay? Well, they're searching your car and searching your car and searching your car, and they can't find no marijuana. But, in an envelope under the driver's seat, they find a couple $1,000s in cash. All of a sudden, there's all kinds of questions about, what are you traveling around with $2,000 in cash in your car for? When you say, well, me and the wife were on vacation, and that is our vacation money. Well, I think I maybe might have smelled some marijuana emanating from your car, and the dog did alert on your car, and we did search your car, but we didn't find any marijuana, but we did find this here drug money. So we're just going to confiscate that from you, and you can be on about your way. And you're sitting there going, huh? First of all, there was no marijuana in my car. Now, I was smoking one of my Cubans, and I got rid of that pretty quick because, I didn't want the beef over smoking a Cohiba. I know that's a slap on the hand, so, but, wasn't anything marijuana. And your dog, I saw you gave him 2 tasty treats after you alerted on my car, so, Now, I thought I was innocent until proven guilty. Well, see, you're not the one being detained. It's your property that is being detained, your $2,000 in cash, because you see, only you are entitled to the presumption of innocence. Your property can be deemed guilty until proven innocent. Yeah, think about it. There are some police bureaus in the United States who derive more than 50% of their financing from asset forfeiture. It's gotten so bad that the Canadian government is warning travelers to the United States that unscrupulous U.S. police departments will shake them down for their cash. There are even companies out there whose business is to train police departments how to get around the rules to acquire more of your cash in these asset forfeitures. And the name of this article from Reason.com is How Cops Became Robbers. I remember when I was a kid, you played cops and robbers. I always wanted to be the cop because the cop was a good guy. So my little brothers always had to play the robbers. I got to be the cop. Well, now it's kind of hard to tell the difference between a cop and a highwayman. The article goes into all sorts of, examples. I mean, there's just, you know, the list of egregious overstepping of bounds is large. Usually what happens is, you know, you bring the cops up in court, you know, and by the time you pay your legal fees and all that, you know, maybe you get back half. And most of that winds up going to pay your legal fees. So the cops have got themselves a really sweet racket here. They can declare that $2,000 they found under the seat of your car, they can declare that property to be guilty until you prove that that money was not intended to purchase drugs. And even if you try to prove it, they'll try to make a deal with you where, okay, I tell you what, we'll give you half your money back if you just go away and shut up. You know, for a lot of people, you know, they look at what it's going to cost them to defend themselves in this crazy court system that we've got, and they say, well, you know, half is better than none. Give me my half and I'll sign off. I'll shut up. The ones who do fight it out, maybe they do get their money back, and then they got to pay their legal fees and everything. It costs them, you know, half of what they lost to get back the rest of it. So, you know, it's like a no-win game for the person who's been shaken down by these revenuers on the road. So that was the one, frankly, that I thought was going to be my tail end. I thought that was going to be the one I finished the show with. It's a good article over at Reason.com, and yeah, you betcha, there will be a link in the YouTube video. When you look down here, there'll be a link in the About portion of the video, and I would suggest you go ahead and read that article. A number of related articles. I mean, this is nothing new. This has been going on for a while. There are many examples of this floating around, and it's pretty twisted. The other thing I wanted to talk about a little bit on this, you know, ISIS, ISIL, you know, whatever the heck is going on in the Middle East. You know, one of the things that Obama's promised us is that we're not going to have any U.S. boots on the ground. So what we're going to do is we're going to train moderate Muslims in Syria and Iraq to take on this ISIS-ISIL thing. You know, well, you know, what is a moderate, you know? If they're Muslims and they're engaged in the fight, I'm not sure they're really moderates. I mean, the moderate Muslims, they're the ones who, you know, they got wife and they got child and they got a small business and they really just want to be left alone. They really don't care who's running the country or whatever, as long as they're not taking an ungodly piece of the action. They know that, you know, whatever government it's in is going to want their little piece of the action. You know, they really don't care who's running. That is the moderates. They're kind of like you, kind of like me. You know, I don't care whether it's a Democrat or a Republican running the United States. Doesn't make any difference to me. I know that neither of them really represent my interests. Both of them are just out to screw me any way they can. So, you know, as long as they're not egregiously picking my pocket, I put up with it, just like everybody else out there, okay? I mean, I'm not ready to, you know, pick up a gun and have an armed revolution just because my taxes are too high, although it pisses me off. I'm not ready to pick up a gun and have a revolution just because the cops are out there doing asset forfeiture seizures on perfectly innocent people. You know, that's not something I'm ready to pick up a gun and fight a revolution over. People will put up with a lot from their government right up until they can't put up with no more. Now, yeah, I'll agree with you that here in the United States, we're getting close to that point. For some Muslims, particularly those who are engaged in these jihads, I guess they've reached that point. They've reached the breaking point. But the moderate Muslims, those are the ones who would just as soon be left alone. They would just as soon sit it out. They would just as soon not be shot at or have to shoot anybody. Chances are, if they've already picked up a gun, they ain't moderates. The other interesting thing is that a lot of the so-called moderates that our President Obama says he wants to arm to the teeth are rapidly defecting to this ISIS, ISIL, IS operation because, frankly, they seem to be better run, Israel, better financed, oil. So this is the outfit that most of them want to team up with because they're the boys who seem to be getting stuff done. A lot of the other Al-Qaeda spin-offs don't seem to be doing so well in recruiting, and a lot of their recruits are jumping ship, going over to this ISIS outfit because they do seem to be getting the job done that even moderate Muslims who are in the fight want to get done. So how do you pick your group of terrorists that are going to do your bidding and be your boys? Now, we've learned many times in recent history that, guys that we set up thinking we're going to be our guys, mujahideen, very quickly become guys who are into self-interest and nationalism instead of towing the U.S. line. Taliban. So, one day they're the Mujahideen, the next day they're the Taliban. It just depends on whether or not they're our terrorists. One day they're El Nasra or, the Free Syrian Army. The next day they're ISIS or ISIL, depending on whether they agree with our position on things. You see how that works? There is a very fine line between a terrorist and a freedom fighter. As always, if they're fighting for our side, they're freedom fighters. If they're fighting for their own side, they're terrorists. Do we understand how that works now? But somehow, Obama says he's going to avoid putting U.S. boots on the ground by using local moderate Muslims to confront the threat of the Islamic State. Yeah, they're not going to put any American boots on the ground. Yeah. They're going to put them in tennis shoes instead. Well, guys, that's really it. I think I've covered all the hot articles that I really needed to cover tonight. So I'm going to take a quick look here at the chat room and see if there's anybody out there with any hot topics that were in the news this past week that I was negligent and did not include in my prepared presentation for the evening. What do you think, guys? What did I miss? Just by well, no, if you're one of the 1%, you want to buy stock in weapons manufacturers. I mean, buying weapons, that's what you peasants do. You peasants buy weapons. If you're a member of the 1%, you buy stock in companies that produce weapons. That way, all these wars that the United States has been in nonstop for the last 13 years. That's amazing. It's I don't know how many. The United States has been around for about 250 years now, or thereabouts. I wonder if anybody's ever gone through the calendar and figured out how many months out of the last 250 years, how many months out of the last 250 years the United States has actually been at peace. Now, as a student of U.S. history, looking back to the formation of this nation, I think it would be a very depressing number. I really do. We have been at war with somebody, or, nowadays we don't even go to war. We don't go to war against nations. We go to war against ideas now. How do you fight a war against terrorism? It's ridiculous. But as long as the war on terrorism is recognized as being a real war, well, the president has pretty much dictatorial powers under, the War Powers Act. So if he can get a war declared, every president needs their war, he's got almost dictatorial authority when it comes to making war. And we've been in a nonstop state of war since World War II. I mean, that's just, a no-brainer. I think we had a little period of time, about, 16 years there between World War I and World War II, where we weren't actively engaged in warfare anywhere in the world. And we had a little bit of time there between Vietnam and when Reagan came in, where we weren't really involved in any warfare against any nation in the world, and then something happened with this little Grenada thing, and that just snowballed, and we've been at war with everybody since Grenada. So Reagan got us back onto a war footing. So there have been very few little blips on the radar where the United States has actually been at peace, not just with the nation, with the world, but with itself. Anybody else out there got some hot item that was in the news over the last week that I missed? I won't buy stock in defense interests either. Even though I guess nowadays, if you want to make a lot of money, that's what you want to do. You want to be a big stockholder in defense industry contractors, because they're the ones that have figured out how to suck government tit and make a lot of money. That on this 9/11, I see somebody posting 9/11 stuff. There is supposedly a secret document out there, that some in Congress are trying to get released to the public, and this, the gist of this secret document is, they blame the entire 9/11 incident on Saudi Arabia or interests within Saudi Arabia. Now, it is a fact that most of the supposed fall guys, terrorists, who flew those airplanes into the buildings, most of them were from Saudi Arabia, okay? And these were hardball Muslim jihadists. These were very fundamentalist Muslims who liked pink-haired strippers, cocaine, and good American whiskey, okay? And gambling, too. Boy, they really like to gamble. So, these guys were not exactly adhering to the tenets of the Koran, but that's okay. In theory, they were here on student visas, and they were here to, shake their booty a little bit before they went back and married a lady in a bag. So, I can understand why, if they were here as students, they might, get a little wild and crazy and then go back home to Saudi Arabia, settle in, be good little Muslims. While they were here, they were going to do as the Americans did. Frankly, those guys were patsies. But, the secret document that supposedly has been held back from you for 13 years is a fallback document. See, they kind of figured, okay, we may have a hard time selling the company line to the American people. And we need a fallback position. So what's our fallback going to be? I know. The Saudis did it. Yeah. We'll blame the Saudis. And it is true that a lot of the money that financed the operation that brought down those towers, a lot of the money seems to have originated from interests within Saudi Arabia. But, the Saudis have often been used as cash cows for little projects like this. Personally, I've got my own theories on these things, and, that I may or may not be right. But I think about it, and I think, okay, I look at the way those buildings came down, and from my point of view, those buildings came down in a controlled demolition. Tower 1, Tower 2, Tower 7, they were all brought down in what appeared to be a controlled demolition. I do not believe that airplanes hitting those towers was going to bring those buildings down. I think that, yeah, airplanes did hit the towers. They might have been flown into those towers by remote control. And, yeah, there may have been dead bodies in those airplanes. You know, those passengers and those pilots, you know, they may indeed have been sacrificed in the name of national interest or whatever. I think those planes were probably, mainly due to the precision. Do you have any idea? Any of you out there play with Microsoft Flight Simulator? You know, I've played with Flight Simulator, and I have quite literally tried to fly an airplane into one of those buildings. I tried to fly an airplane into the Pentagon, and, you know, Flight Simulator is not perfect, I understand, but do you have any idea how hard it is? So, you know, I'm thinking about this, and, you know, these guys couldn't even fly a Piper Cub. How are they going to do all these sophisticated maneuvers to fly into these towers and then fly into the Pentagon? I mean, that's just crazy. So, you know, my best guess is that the airplanes, and yes, they were airplanes, were probably flown in by remote control. The passengers, pilots, they were killed. It's easy to kill people in an airplane. I mean, all you got to do is evacuate the atmosphere out of the airplane, fly it up to about 30,000 feet for about 5-10 minutes. They're dead. If you've got remote control, you then bring it in, have it do whatever you want it to do. Okay, I mean, it's ridiculously easy to do. And yes, we've got the technology to control these airplanes remotely. That is easy to do. But okay, you smack an airplane into something like, you know, the Twin Towers in New York. That ain't enough to bring them down. And you want those bad boys down. You want them to fall down. So you got to wire them up to implode. Well, anybody who knows anything about demolishing buildings will tell you that it takes a considerable amount of time and preparation to set a building up to implode into its own footprint, the way both the towers fell, the way Building 7 fell. That takes, you know, that takes some preparation. You don't just do that on the snap of a finger. You don't just do that because Larry Silverman said pull it. Okay? It don't happen that way. It could take weeks, perhaps months, to wire up all those buildings to fall into their own footprint on command. Well, gee, you know, what's in evidence? What's in evidence? The elevators in all those buildings were being renovated for 3 years before 9/11. There were elevator renovations taking place. Now, if you're the guys who are in there renovating the elevators, you have access to all the internal core structures of that building. And with 3 years to do it, you got plenty of time to wire those buildings up to do whatever you want them to do. And who owned the elevator company that did those renovations? A Jew who mysteriously evacuated to Israel shortly after the buildings came down. And who were the only people arrested on 9/11? Some Jews who were dressed up in Arab clothing, dancing and cheering, and videotaping the towers falling, dressed up in Arab garb. They were the only ones arrested. Almost seemed like they knew in advance who was conspicuously absent from the towers on the day they came down. Jews employed by firms who were predominantly owned by Israeli interests, who paid a big settlement to get out of their lease, get the heck out of those towers, and moved over to New Jersey just weeks before those towers came down. The biggest Israeli shipping firm. So, you know, who do you think I think brought those towers down? you're going to have to consider the evidence and make up your own damn mind. I do believe that rogue elements within the United States government had a lot to do with it. Wouldn't surprise me a bit if rogue elements within the United States government didn't put it out for bid. But in the end, I think the ones who won the bid and actually did the deed, actually executed the operation, were probably Israelis. Now, whether the Israeli government was directly involved, or if perhaps rogue elements within Israel did the dirty deed, here again, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure if we'll ever know. I can tell you one thing, though. If the Saudis were involved, it was as useful idiots who wrote a bunch of checks to charitable organizations that they had no idea what they were involved with. Anyway, my opinion on such things, and $5 get you a cup of coffee at that fancy yuppie coffee place where they charge too much for a cup of coffee. What do you think, guys? Is that enough for one night? I've done almost 30 minutes of overtime at this point. Are there any other hot topics in the news that I really need to cover? Maury, I'm not sure about the World Bank whistleblower. That story I'm not familiar with. Wish I knew more about it. Don't know. Yeah, I know. The issue of Scottish independence, I wish I knew more on that issue too. You know, I've read a lot of articles on the topic, and I understand some of the historical arguments why Scotland feels that they should be separate from the UK. I think the biggest argument they're putting on the table right now is that they are paying many more times more in taxes than what they get back from the British system, and they're pissed off about it. They're pissed off. They feel like they have been mistreated. They pay a tremendous amount in taxes and get very little back in terms of benefit, kind of like most American citizens. I mean, you pay an enormous amount of money in taxes, and it seems they can't even fix the potholes in the road out in front of your house. So, you know, they're pissed off. They feel like it's taxation without representation. That's really what the colonies went to war against Britain for here, is this taxation without representation. We got to pay all this tax, and we don't get nothing back. We don't even get to have a say in how our taxes are spent. Oh, no. You're peasants. You pay. We decide. That type of attitude will foment a revolution. And I think, you know, that's really the bottom line of what's going on in Scotland. They are just sick and tired of being taxed to death and not getting anything back for it. Their association with Britain costs them more than the benefits they derive. All right, guys, I think that's it for me. I've done enough barking at the moon for one night. I've still got to bundle this thing up, get it ready to post on YouTube, so I really do have to back out of here at this time. I hope y'all enjoyed tonight's presentation. One thing I might mention, it does improve my standing considerably with YouTube. If, you know, when you finish watching this video, you know, and you got the little gizmos down here, you know, if you hit the like button, you know, that does give me a certain amount of points with YouTube and makes it more likely that my video will get, you know, on the top of the list if somebody's looking for stuff. Frankly, even if you push the I hated this video, that gives me points too. So either like or dislike the video. I really don't care which. I would prefer that you like it. But, you know, hey, if you really didn't like my presentation tonight, please hit the do not like button, because any reaction that this video acquires tends to improve its standing. It's also handy, if you think about it, leave a brief comment on the video, because here again, you know, a video that gets a lot of comments tends to move higher in the standings. It might actually get more views on YouTube. You know, this YouTube thing is very hard for me to figure out. I've never been, you know, real cagey about how I market my YouTube videos, but I have come to understand those few little ditties. So, you know, if you would please take the time to generate some reaction to this YouTube video, I would appreciate it. Y'all have a good evening. I'll see you next Tuesday night, and you betcha we'll do some more barking at the moon. Good night, all.
Calling out to you. Won't you turn